So it is time to talk about week 15. So before I get into what specifics we're going to cover this week or just the code challenges, I did redo, as I talked about last week, and removing the steps that we had planned. And at the end on week 17, we will have a finish and share. And this one will count as a step. Okay, so it'll be the equivalent as one of the steps. So the last step we do will be 5, although I will have you do some work on the final one, mostly. Well, actually, I've kind of been thinking about it because at this point, I can't see having you implement an API, although I think that's great experience. Okay, so let's dive into week 15 here. So in week 15, I want to start with like end of semester because it is a reality that we are at coming towards the end of the semester. So the final due date to submit late work or use a late pass is Monday, December 8th by noon. So let's just roll over because I happen to have it available here and roll into December. So this is the last week of the semester. And so on that Monday at noon, that's when you have to have used, submitted any late work and used a late pass. And the reason is that we're just trying to wrap things up and I need to have a cutoff for just the work that's going to come in that last week and for you to know where you stand in the class. So that's the date. Now the last date to schedule your technical interview, okay? And I should have had this up, but I don't. So let me just bring it up real quick. I think it is right here. Okay. So the last date to actually do one is the 10th. Okay. But you have to be on the schedule. You have to put yourself on the schedule. And I hope nobody's waiting this long. I hope you're coming to see me beforehand. As I've talked about before, I have seen many people at this point. So I look forward to seeing more as well. So the last date to schedule yourself. So let me come back around to that to be clear. So Friday at noon, okay, so this Friday, the 4th at noon is the last date you can get on the schedule. So just make sure you're planning accordingly. And then your private repos, I actually delete them in preparation for spring 2026. So just know that that's the case, that the Monday after the end of the semester, so here's the end of the semester, and I generally start this process the Monday after because I prepare my classes to set up for the spring. So just make sure you're keeping that in mind. Okay, so at this point, we have now started the API by doing the geolocation. So what I'm going to have you do before you actually do a challenge related to that is this. And just you can click on this, and this is the challenge that we're going to do. So you have two challenges. Part one is really just some refactoring that I want you to do. But before then, you're going to also create a new file called codechallenge.md and create a H1 with my code challenge research. Yeah. So because there's often going to come times when I'm going to say, and you'll see this today in some of the challenges, if you've tried something and you've researched or you've done this or that, or the other thing is if you use LLMs, what were the search terms you used to try to answer some of the questions? That's okay, right? Remember, it's when we're coding that we definitely want to reference where we get code at. Okay, so this is like in Markdown. You just do this to do a heading 1, and so a heading 2 for week 15 code challenge. Okay, so first create that new file just in your root of 15. As a matter of fact, I should have put this before, but in this case, go ahead and do your normal 15 setup. So actually, I'm going to move this by the time you get here. I'm going to move the 15 setup above. So go ahead and create, and I say at this point set up 15 because hopefully by now you've got the process down where you create a new folder, copy the ending from 14 in, and you're good to go. And then you have a commit message here. Okay, so what is your first code challenge? Well, I think we're at the place, which we've probably passed the place, we could have done this before, where we're going to create in the following folder. Create in the following folder, week 15, you're going to create folders. You're going to create JS and CSS. and then copy the associated files into these folders. Now, of course, this is going to break your code. Now, VS Code will try to fix it for you. I would actually recommend you fix it yourself because I actually I said, okay, give it a try. It didn't do it right. So, but either way, you're going to have to fix issues because in this case, where we have, this is just an example of one of them. And in this case, it's all in the app.js where we have import star, which means bring in anything that's been exported. And then when we do as, we're saying then we have to reference that in our code dot whatever the function name is from the file. Okay, so this is the way we have it mostly now. And you already saw this pattern. I briefly talked about it when we were doing the AQI integrated file, okay, and actually the data service file. So what you're going to change here is you're going to still do an import, but now import the specific function names you need. Now I haven't said, like, even for this one, because this is your job, is to go through and look at each of the modules and then bring in these references to these functions. Okay, and when you do this, then you'll also need to update the associated module calls. Okay, so where we had something like let's see, submit. What was the code, right? So if I was, oh, actually, I don't want to show you because I've actually done this work already here. So, but here's what I would say is anywhere. Go back here. Right, anywhere in your code where you had called form handler dot, then you can change that to remove the form handler because we're importing the functions into the local scope this way. And it's just more efficient way to do it. And by the way, this is called object deconstructing. This is a ES6, which is, not the latest iteration, but it's definitely the latest generation of JavaScript where we can define an object, and then when we want to reference that object, we can then locally define whatever keys we want. And we saw this when we did in this case the AQI base and the AQI API code, right? So instead of bringing over star and then from, this just makes that process. And I think we also did this, yeah, we also did this in the Git integrator file. Okay, so you do that work. So get that working, right? Attempt to get code. I don't think I ran anything tricky there. I did have to just kind of think through the process and make sure I had everything working. So, and by the way, definitely, right? Definitely test everything here. If for some reason you don't get working code and you need to see when I cover this solution, just tell me what you've done. And that's why I had you create this file up here, because there's going to be times, as I've said before, when you're going to need to do that. Now, once you're ready, refactor folder imports and function calls is your commit message there. Okay, so as I set up to start on the work for this week, I realized there was something I didn't cover. And that was when we finished up passing, we did the await, we did the async on the load and display AQI. One thing and I'm kind of curious here, you're more than welcome to tell me how many of you actually tested the error condition, because all I did was test the good path, what we call the good path. It's often called that. It's like, yeah, it works. But what happens when it's not the good path? And I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to manage this. And I actually did a little searching today to see if I can. Wow, I didn't have to do that before. I'm not sure why. But coming back here, now seeing actually the browser says you have to reload. So in this case, in the state of the code that we left it, okay, where we returned, right, because we created a new promise, resolve and reject. And last time the challenge was for you to figure out how, or attempt to fix the error when user did give us a location, and then send back by resolve, because when the resolve happens, then it returns that to here. But what we didn't do, and I thought this is a good place to actually start here, is what happens when the user, in this case, right, never allows right? So we get another error message. And again, I hope somebody in here actually tested the other condition, but if you didn't, no big deal. So now here's what you're going to do. So here, this is in my write-up. Okay, so do some research and see if you can determine the reason we're getting the following error when we don't allow location, right? So what is that? So again, this is where you may lean more into here, right? What 15 code challenge. And actually you could put a heading for each one of these if there was any notes you wanted for the part one and then part two. Ooh, I gotta fix that as well. Okay, so that is your code challenge. Now I did come back here and what I said is there's your challenge. Oh yeah, 30 points for each of them and then reply to any comments with any comments or question about the code challengers end of semester dates. 20 points about that and then give a substantive reply, 20 points for that. Okay. Okay, so I hope you are enjoying the challenges. We'll see. This one is an interesting one. I actually had to think about it myself. I was like, oh yeah, why does that? Why does that? What is an uncaught? Oh yeah, okay. Actually, in the name, it actually is a hint as well. Okay, so what you want to do here is there's nothing to submit as far as your code challenges. Remember, I'll look at those commits in your private repo, but in your reply, this is the part you need to do here. Okay, have a good one, and I'll see you on the solution.